Starting today, this is our place. Strangers can scram.
Whoa, hold on a minute. What's going on with both of you?
After my mother's funeral had just ended, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law began to insult me non-stop. My husband intervened, but the two of them showed no signs of slowing down. You're being tricked. Maybe you've been brainwashed or something? Haha. That's right. It's all because your mom spoiled you. She's the one who raised you to be this way. Your mom's to blame. When my sister-in-law and mother-in-law badmouthed my mother, my anger exploded. I can tolerate them speaking ill of me, but I absolutely will not tolerate them speaking ill of my deceased mother. My name is Kathy, 35 years old. I met my husband David, who is a year older than me, at work, and we got married 5 years ago. I used to live with my mother and husband. Reflecting back, a lot has happened in these past 5 years. 5 years ago, I was working at the real estate company my father owned. I've always been interested in the flow of people and money, so I studied economics in college and applied that knowledge to my work. However, there were those who saw my success as a result of my own ability, and those who thought it was due to my parents' influence. For example, when I heard people talking about me, they often referred to me as the boss's daughter, rather than by my name. Moreover, my husband was the top salesperson in the same company. It seems that he was popular with many women, and I received nasty glances from various people. Of course, I don't think that all of my work success is due to my own efforts. I believe it's all thanks to the cooperation of those around me. But I couldn't help but feel frustrated at being labeled as the boss's daughter. While I was living these frustrating days, my father passed away. My brother took over as president, and the harsh stares towards me became even more severe. You must have screwed up. That's why your brother's now the president. Now we'll have to call you the president's sister, right? Haha. Normally, I might just feel frustrated, but at that time, I had just lost my real father. Those words were hard to take for me, who was mentally worn out. After my father's funeral, a single thought crossed my mind. What do I really want to do? Even if I tried to keep going in this situation, something inspirational was missing. As I thought about it, I found myself saying, I want to be an investor in front of my husband. David, rather than rejecting my outrageous proposal, supported me. When I told my mom that I wanted to quit my job and become an investor, she laughed and said, You didn't have to worry about your father. You should have done what you loved from the start. Despite my father's recent death, this might seem outrageous. Before talking to my mother, I was always thinking about the negatives. But looking at my mother smile, I began to feel that the opinions of others didn't matter. While dealing with the funeral, settling the estate, moving, and other busy tasks, I started as an investor. Of course, not everything went smoothly from the beginning, but my calm and cheerful husband and mother encouraged me every step of the way. Thanks to both of them, the investments I started with my savings and my father's inheritance went well. After a few years, my income had significantly increased compared to when I was working at the company. On the one hand, I was living a fulfilling life, but on the other hand, there were two people who were a big concern. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law. My sister-in-law is 3 years older than my husband, 4 years older than me, and she's still unmarried. From the time that David and I decided to get married, I got the feeling she wasn't particularly pleased. Even my mother-in-law seemed to think that I was just a rich little daddy's girl, despite the fact that I was working at the same level as any other employee, even though my father was the CEO. Every time I went to my in-laws, she'd make snide comments when my husband or father-in-law weren't around. Being a pampered princess, I bet you can't do housework worth a dime. It's a woman's job to do the chores. Please don't make David do it. Mother-in-law, my own mother taught me a lot, so I can handle things on my own. But since I'm also working, David and I help each other out. It was his idea, actually. But there was no way my mother-in-law would accept that. Even my sister-in-law was often aggravated in my presence, saying things like, "It's absurd that a woman who makes her husband do housework can get married." My relationship with my mother-in-law and sister-in-law only got worse when my father-in-law passed away. "It must be nice, huh? Living off David's money and slacking off at home? I have to put up with so much because my husband's gone. Why is it that you get to live so freely, Kathy?" Mother-in-law, as I've told you before, I make a living as an investor. I'm not slacking off at all. In fact, I have less free time than when I was working a regular job. "If you're really making a living, at least give me an allowance. You can't even have kids. You're really a good-for-nothing wife." With the death of my father-in-law, my mother-in-law became more fixated on money. She seemed to resent the fact that I, whom she considered a shut-in, didn't seem to be in financial distress, despite the fact that I had become less active outside the home as I continued my work as an investor. But that didn't mean I was thinking of giving my mother-in-law money. She claimed to be putting up with a lot, but every time I went to the in-laws, there were more and more luxury items. It was clear where the money would go if I gave it to her. I loved David, who didn't doubt people and didn't do anything to be doubted himself, so I had decided not to tell him about my in-laws. There was one time, however, that I confided in my own mother. Why can't I have children? The uncertainty looming as I approached 35 and the constant questions from my mother-in-law about, "When will you have a baby?" got to me. Her words calling me good for nothing wouldn't leave my mind, and I ended up letting it out. But my mother just looked puzzled at my outburst. "Well, I had you when I was 35, so it's okay. God will give us the right timing, I'm sure." Her words lightened my heart. Since then, even when my mother-in-law mentioned children, I was able to reassure myself children are a gift. Now, after these tumultuous 5 years, things are finally starting to calm down. Then, suddenly, my mother passed away. She had a subarachnoid hemorrhage. Losing my mother, who has always been my beacon of light, plunged me into grief. David, who had lived with me for several years, seemed to be taking it pretty hard too, though he was kind and supportive. The funeral took place before we had fully come to terms with my mother's absence. Many people came to the funeral of my mother, who had worked as an executive at the company my brother took charge of, even after my father passed away. Among them were my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. It seemed they had timed it for when David was away from his seat. "There's no need for condolences, right?" Without even offering condolences, they started signing the register. I was simply dumbfounded at the insensitivity of my in-laws. And yet, when David returned, my in-laws changed their demeanor in an instant. "You may be going through a tough time, but Kathy's shock is probably greater. You should support her," they would say, as if they were considering my feelings. Later, when I was deeply feeling the exhaustion from the past busy few days, the doorbell rang at home. My husband, considerate as he is, answered the door to find my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. Due to David's kind nature, he thought they must have come to cheer me up. David invited the two in without any hesitation. As my mother-in-law and sister-in-law entered the living room, they glanced at me and drew an unpleasant curve on their mouths. And then they uttered words beyond my expectation. "From today, this is our home. Outsiders should leave."
Mom?
David exclaimed in surprise. But my mother-in-law didn't stop talking. "Until now, we've put up with you because your mom was here. But now, only unemployed Kathy is left. If you are parasitized by such a woman, you will be ruined. We'll live together with you, so you should divorce Kathy."
What are you saying, Mom? At a time like this? And what do you mean by unemployed? I've told you many times that Kathy is an investor.
When you say investor, it sounds like she has a proper job. But essentially, isn't she just playing around, buying and selling stocks? I wonder how such a woman can be a wife. You can find a much better wife.
Hold on a minute. What do you mean by bad-mouthing Kathy? What do you two intend to say? Kathy earns her own money. Don't call it playing around.
You're being fooled. You've been together with Kathy's mother all the time. Haven't you been brainwashed? Haha. That's right. Kathy has become like this because her mom spoiled her. I understand why David wants to defend Kathy. After all, it's her mom's fault for raising Kathy like this. When my sister-in-law and mother-in-law badmouthed my mom, my anger, which had been lethargic until a moment ago, exploded. I can bear with them badmouthing me, but I will never tolerate them badmouthing my mom. Stop speaking ill of my deceased mother. I expressed my anger to its full extent and glared at my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. However, both of them were grinning, showing no signs of fear. Okay, I get it. You don't like us speaking ill of your mom, huh? Haha. Now that the mom who has always sided with you and let you be a shut-in is gone, it must be hard for you to hear the truth. I looked down to see my clenched fist trembling. In order to suppress my own outburst, I took a deep breath. And just as I was about to retort, David, not me, was the one who spoke first.
Enough is enough, Mom. Don't speak ill of Kathy or my mother-in-law. Kathy is not a shut-in. She's a bona fide investor. My mother-in-law and I have been cheering for Kathy's efforts all along. If Kathy was just playing around, neither my mother-in-law nor I would have allowed it. Even my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, and certainly I, couldn't hide our surprise at the usually calm David's low voice. As for my mother-in-law, she seemed unable to digest the situation and began to hastily make excuses. Don't be so angry. Even so, the life Kathy led so far was possible because of your earnings, right? Didn't you let her live a privileged life to the point of buying such a high-rise condo? Poor David. If you live with us, we'll do all the housework. Just give us a small allowance, that's all we need. The rest is... Don't you know, Mom?
David interrupted my mother-in-law's words, speaking in a flustered voice.
This apartment is Kathy's.
What? At David's words, my mother-in-law let out an absurd cry. Unable to hide her surprise, she started to fact-check with her eyes wide open. This apartment is Kathy's? Didn't you buy it?
When did I ever say that? This apartment is a legacy from my father-in-law, and Kathy got it. That's why the title, of course, is Kathy's. Plus, we split the living expenses evenly. I don't know what you guys are thinking, but Kathy earns more than I do.
What? Not only my mother-in-law, but even my sister-in-law were surprised by David's confession. No wonder. They couldn't have imagined that I was earning more than David. My mother-in-law lost her momentum at David's words and became like a corpse. Taking over for my defeated mother-in-law, my sister-in-law opened her mouth. That can't be. Investors make that much. Making more money than working for a company just by buying and selling as an individual?
I don't know about other investors. It might just be that Kathy has a good sense for it. But facts are facts. And yet, how dare you belittle my precious wife? This is our home? Don't kid me. Both of you, get out now.
At David's words, my sister-in-law began to panic. What? Wait a minute. We sold our house thinking we could live here from today. What? Now it was my turn, along with my husband, to let out a cry of surprise.
You sold our house? Why all of a sudden? At least you could have consulted with me.
We thought we could live here. Besides, we didn't have money. I quit my job thinking you would support me. So if you don't let us live here, we'll be in trouble. Hey, Mom, say something. While looking at David with pleading eyes, my sister-in-law shook her mother, who had become like a corpse. However, perhaps the shock was too great, and my mother-in-law was in a daze. My sister-in-law, who had lost her confidence, clung to me this time. Hey, Kathy, I'm sorry. I apologize. Please persuade David for me. We can't survive like this. You said you sold your house, which means you have a considerable amount of money at hand, don't you? To the clinging sister-in-law, I said coldly. At that, the sister-in-law began to flip out at me. Don't get smart. Don't talk back. Just because your investments went well, don't get carried away.
Enough is enough.
David raised his voice, which echoed far more than the sister-in-law's scream. Towards the sister-in-law, who closed her mouth at that voice, David directed a sharp gaze.
Forget about the house. I won't even ask for my share, so just get out of here right now.
Saying that, my husband practically forced his mother and sister out of the house and locked the door. For a while, we could hear the sound of the doorbell and the pounding on the door, but after a while, it became quiet. After that, according to relatives, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law seemed to have rented a cheap apartment and started living together. My in-laws' house, which was situated in a remote area, couldn't be sold for a high price, and the land was cheap too. My sister-in-law couldn't manage to get a decent job, and their money quickly ran out. Still not learning their lesson, they had tried to rely on me and David several times, but of course, we turned them away at the door. They had sold all the branded goods they owned, and now I hear they are barely making ends meet by working part-time jobs from morning till night. Meanwhile, I've been able to live freely as an investor without anyone around to make nasty comments. And next year, we're planning to add one more member to our family, just as my mother had said. I was thankful to her once again for being blessed at just the right time.
It's been a few months since my husband, who has a bad drinking habit, received a terminal illness diagnosis. He seems to think that it's me who's been diagnosed and has been living recklessly, drinking, having affairs. It's like he's doing whatever he wants. He even had a nerve to say something outrageous to me.
You're really tough? Like a cockroach? Why don't you just die already?
Even though he's the one who looks close to death, I wonder why he can't see it. To confront him with reality, I said something to him.
What are you talking about? It's you who's been given the terminal diagnosis.
What?
He just stood there with his mouth open, unable to comprehend my words. Looking into his eyes, I repeated myself.
I said it's you who has a terminal diagnosis.
My name is Amy, and I'm 40 years old. If I had to describe my life in one word, it would be dramatic. I lost my parents in an accident when I was in 11th grade, and my relatives kept passing the buck, saying they couldn't afford to take care of me. Eventually, I ended up living with my father's sister, my aunt, but I was treated horribly there. I would be given noticeably less food than everyone else, and I often heard them wishing I would leave soon. My aunt already had 2 sons and probably couldn't afford to support me. I guess they had no choice but to act that way, being pushed into taking me in by the rest of the family. I leave this house as soon as I graduate from high school. With that determination, I started working part-time at a restaurant, and after a few years, my life took a turn. It was right after I started 12th grade.
If you haven't decided on your future yet, why don't you marry me and live together?
The man who made this proposal was my then boyfriend, now husband, Matthew. At that time, he was a full-time employee and my trainer at the part-time job. He was incredibly calm and great at teaching. We shared the same taste in music and quickly became a couple.
Thank you, but are you sure, Matthew? Won't it be a burden to have me in your life?
Not at all. I have enough savings to support you, Amy, and I'm more than happy to have you. Of course, only if you're okay with it. I know I have a bad drinking habit, but I'll cut back once we're married. I always put your happiness first. So, will you marry me?
He said, taking my hand and smiling. Indeed, his bad drinking habit was his only flaw, but I loved him enough to overlook even that, and our relationship was good even after becoming a couple. That's why I happily accepted his proposal, and we got married after I graduated from high school. 2 years later, we were blessed with a child.
Well done, Amy!
When I told my husband I was pregnant, he lifted me up joyfully. Marrying the person I love and having his child, It was the pinnacle of happiness. At that time, I had no idea that such an event was waiting for us. The problem started a few months after our child was born. At that time, I was busy with childcare and household chores, and my husband frequently came home drunk from work-related socializing.
I'm home,
He'd say cheerily at the front door, and I, worried, would ask him, "Where have you been drinking until this late? And if you're going to be late because of drinking, I wish you'd let me know. I've been waiting with dinner ready." At that, my husband glared at me.
Oh, shut up. It's my life.
Here we go again. At the beginning of our relationship, I used to be troubled by his bad drinking habits. But now that we were married, taking care of him had become easier. While dismissing his behavior, I urged him to drink some water.
You know, you've aged.
What? He stared at me as he drank, and I was taken aback by his unexpected words.
I mean, you've aged. You used to take care of yourself even at home, but now you're always in an old sweatshirt and sweatpants with no makeup. Why did you let yourself go like this?
He looked me up and down as if assessing my whole appearance. There are things you can and cannot say, even to a husband with a bad drinking habit. I felt as if my efforts were being trampled on and couldn't help but retort. I can't help it. Household chores and child care are hard, and I need to save every penny for Carter's future.
Oh, making excuses is the beginning of the end. I should never have married someone like you.
With that, he got upset and retreated to the bedroom. Matthew, have you always thought that way? I spent a sleepless night, filled with sorrow, realizing my husband might have always thought so. From that day, our relationship changed. It seemed that my normally kind husband got tired of pretending after that day. He began to say harsh words, even when sober. When in a bad mood, he would kick or slap me. Light violence became a part of my life. Sometimes he would come home smelling of women's perfume, and though not confirmed, it's likely he was cheating. I've thought about divorce many times, but all I have in my bank account is the little money I saved from my part-time job days. In this situation, divorcing and supporting myself and my son would be impossible, and the thought of giving up custody of my son to him was unbearable. Besides, seeking alimony in a divorce case would require hiring a lawyer and other expenses. Considering all this, I couldn't divorce him for the sake of my son's future. One day, amid such days, an incident occurred.
Are you Amy, Matthew's wife? There's something about Matthew we need to discuss. Please come to the hospital.
The caller was from the hospital where my husband had a follow-up health check. Surprised by the sudden news, I rushed to the hospital.
Matthew is suffering from terminal cancer.
As I entered the hospital room and heard the doctor's words, I was at a loss for words. The doctor continued speaking as I stood there in shock.
It's difficult to say this, but Matthew only has about 6 months to live. We wanted to inform you first, Amy, before telling him directly, as it can be hard to hear.
Thank you. What should we do now?
There are several options. The choice depends on the patient and the family, so it might be best to discuss it with Matthew first.
The doctor's words left me unable to hide my turmoil. Despite his recent bad attitude towards me, I had deep feelings for my husband, having spent many years together.
I'll talk to him.
I left the hospital with heavy thoughts. What should I say to him? I couldn't find the right words, no matter how hard I tried to think. As I was contemplating this, my husband returned home.
I'm home!
Drunk as usual. He demanded water as soon as he entered the living room, treating me like a servant.
Actually, I have something important to talk about.
What's with a serious tone?
He started fiddling with his mobile phone after taking a sip of water.
Listen carefully. I have received a terminal diagnosis.
When I said this, he stopped scrawling and asked,
What did you say?
I said I have received a terminal diagnosis.
Before I could clarify that it was he who was diagnosed, he asked. Terminal cancer. The doctor said the family and the patient should decide what to do. What do you want to do?
Do whatever you want. It's not my problem.
Why are you acting like this doesn't concern you? It's a terminal diagnosis. He paused, scrawling only for a moment, continuing to look at his phone even as I spoke.
It's not about me. Why you want me to worry? If you want sympathy, ask Carter.
That's not it. It's you.
Okay. End of discussion.
He left the living room and retreated to his room. I tried several times after that to bring up the terminal diagnosis, but he would cut me off before I could even start. Finally,
Don't talk about terminal diagnosis in front of me anymore,
he said. He won't even listen to me. Fine. Do as you please. A few months after my husband received his terminal diagnosis, it happened one morning while he was having breakfast.
Thanks for the meal.
In front of him was a barely touched breakfast. I asked him, looking pale, "Don't you have an appetite?"
Yeah, lately I don't feel like eating much. I get short of breath even when walking, and maybe I'm losing strength. I'm off to work. I'll be late again today.
He left the house with a sigh. He still doesn't believe he's the one with the terminal diagnosis. I was amazed and cleared away his leftover breakfast. Honestly, seeing him like what was painful, but he had shattered my heart many times. He'd interrupt and refuse to listen whenever I tried to talk about the diagnosis. I no longer felt the need to help him, and he might as well live out his remaining time in his delusion. With these thoughts, I began to tackle the day's household chores one by one. An unexpected visitor came to my usual day-to-day life. The doorbell rang after 3 p.m. When I opened the door, a young and beautiful woman was standing there. "Hello, my name is Michelle. I'm always grateful for Matthew's help," she said, and I recognized the scent of the perfume that lingered when my husband returned home. It was clear that she was the woman he was having an affair with. Michelle seemed to work part-time at my husband's workplace. I couldn't help but feel disdain for his method of preying on a vulnerable young woman from his workplace. "What brings you here? Matthew is at work right now." "No, I came to talk to you today, Amy. I'll be blunt. Please divorce Matthew," she said, looking straight into my eyes. "Divorce? It's not that simple. We're married." "I know, but Amy, you don't have long to live, right? Then please, give him to me soon." Clearly, Michelle also misunderstood that I was the one who received the terminal diagnosis and pressed on with the conversation. "Matthew is kind and financially stable, truly reliable. He even bought me this brand name bag. And he's been so supportive, even knowing I have no parents. You don't understand Matthew's kindness, do you, Amy?" At that moment, I felt a certain kinship with her. Our situations were similar, and she reminded me of myself when I was younger and in love with my husband. A young and beautiful woman like her shouldn't be seeking her own unhappiness. Before she regretted getting involved with my husband, I asked her something. "Don't you realize who really received a terminal diagnosis? By looking at Matthew and me." "What?" Michelle was taken aback, not expecting such a question. "You work with Matthew, right? He's pale, gets out of breath easily, while here I am, standing and talking to you without any sign of tiredness, my complexion healthy. Who do you think is really terminally ill?" "That would be you, Amy, because Matthew said so." Michelle looked at me, uncertain. Perhaps she was beginning to realize the truth. "Besides, Matthew's money is almost gone." "What?" She was shocked again. "With all the drinking and spending he does, and you must be enjoying most of those benefits, right? I bet he's given you more than just that bag. If Matthew is the one with the terminal diagnosis, you'll have a hard time ahead. Hospital bills, living expenses. Do you still want Matthew?" Michelle, seemingly at a loss for words about Matthew, trembled and said, "Excuse me," before leaving. I doubted that Michelle believed everything I said. However, if it made her reconsider even a little, that would be enough. I watched the door she had exited through, lost in thought. That night, for a change, my husband came home sober, but he clearly looked exhausted. When I asked why he sighed, he said he had tried to work as usual, but couldn't keep up his strength and had to take several breaks, which angered his boss.
Are you okay? You're really tough, like a cockroach.
As he muttered, I gave him a cold look. What are you talking about? You're the one with a terminal diagnosis.
What?
He stood there, mouth open, unable to comprehend my words. I said you're the one who's been diagnosed.
Hey, wait a minute. You're joking, right?
He shook my shoulders as he said this. I wouldn't joke about this. Looking at your recent health and complexion, isn't it obvious who's terminally ill? I answered calmly while he shook my shoulders.
You kept quiet about this?
Of course not. You just misunderstood on your own. I tried to tell you, but you didn't want to listen, so I stayed quiet.
Bastard!
Enraged by my words, he raised his hand in anger, expecting to be hit. I closed my eyes, but no pain came. When I slowly opened my eyes, I saw my son stopping my husband's hand from hitting me. Dad, stop it!
What? Talking back to your father?
My husband was still furious, even towards our son, but he couldn't easily shake off his hand. Uncomfortable, he finally let go and retreated to his room. Mom, are you okay? I heard Dad yelling from my room. My son calls out to me. Thank you, Carter. Really, thank you. Oh, my child has grown up so much. I might not know what would have happened without him. With feelings of gratitude for his growth, I thank him repeatedly. Then my son made a suggestion. The next morning, while I was making breakfast, my husband entered the living room awkwardly.
Good morning. Sorry for getting angry yesterday,
he said, standing next to me, and I turned to him with displeasure. What? Why are you suddenly so meek?
No, I want to apologize for everything. I'm really sorry.
He apologized deeply. Why are you suddenly apologizing like this?
No, I just realized I need you. Will you stay with me until the end? We are a married couple who've been through a lot together, right?
His unexpected words made me laugh derisively. A married couple who've been through a lot? Don't make me laugh. And what about a girl you were having an affair with?
That girl, Michelle? She hasn't returned my messages since last night, and I can't reach her by phone.
So that's why he's turning to me. According to my husband, as soon as he learned from me that he was the one with the terminal diagnosis, he immediately messaged Michelle, expecting a prompt message of concern from her, but there was no reply. Watching my pitiful husband, I felt relieved that Michelle had escaped from his harm.
So you're the only one I can rely on. Please, I'm begging you.
What do you really want? I won't understand unless you say it clearly. After a while, my husband seemed to have made up his mind, and with a deeper apology, he said,
Please, lend me the money for hospitalization.
No. How will you pay it back? It's your own fault, so deal with it yourself. Besides, even if you get hospitalized, you're not going to make it. Do you really need to be in the hospital? When I said that, my husband continued.
Yeah, I know I'm not going to make it, but if I have to suffer like this at home without any medication, I'd rather be hospitalized and die a little more peacefully.
I see. That's what he's after. He wants me to pay for his hospitalization. I couldn't help but smile at my husband's ridiculousness. Seeing my expression, he seemed to finally feel relieved, thinking I had forgiven him. unaware of the worst situation awaiting him. Absolutely not. You're only being convenient now that it's disadvantageous for you, I said bluntly, and then presented the divorce papers I had kept in my apron pocket. I want a divorce.
Hey, are you going to abandon your husband, who you've spent years with and who has only a little time left?
Abandon? You abandoned me a long time ago. When I said that, my husband hesitated to speak, then asked with a hint of dissatisfaction.
But what will you do from now on? About Carter's education, where to live?
Don't worry. Carter is planning to drop out of school and work. He's interested in car mechanics, and a friend's parents run a garage. They've offered to let Carter and me work and live there. It's fortunate to have such good friends. Until Carter drops out, I plan to stay at my relative's house. It's much better than living here. Honestly, I've been wanting to divorce you for a long time. The only reason I didn't was because of Carter. But now that Carter's future is decided, there's no need for me to stay. As I spoke firmly, my husband realized he could no longer hold me back and stared at me in disbelief. Then sign these divorce papers right now. I'll be organizing Carter's and my things in the meantime. A moving company will come later. Please, cooperate then. Saying this, I saw my husband's face, worn out and looking at me with pleading eyes until the end. He would likely spend his last days in this house. I sympathized, but it was his punishment for years of persecution. So, goodbye, Matthew. I closed the door of my home. Later, I heard from a mutual friend that my ex-husband had passed away. His family gathered for the funeral. I would probably be blamed for not being there in his last moments if I attended. I had no intention of going to a place where such negative assumptions could be made. However, after a few years, when my feelings had settled, I visited a certain place with my son.
You don't have to pay respects to such men.
Hey, don't speak like that. The place we visited was my ex-husband's grave. A mutual friend told me where it was, in a cemetery where he now rested. Honestly, I never wanted to involve myself with my ex-husband again, but I wanted to report to him that our son had grown up so much. But I wouldn't come here again, because we were moving out of state. Since then, Carter worked while gaining practical experience as a mechanic and successfully obtained his automotive mechanic certification. He's set to work in a garage out of state from spring. Let's go back. We still have to prepare for the move. As I said this and stood up to call Carter, he didn't move.
Mom, do you regret marrying Dad?
He asked, looking at me. What are you saying? If I hadn't married Matthew, you wouldn't have been born. I'm proud of you, Carter, for trying so hard to save me from Matthew. Thank you for being born. As I said this, my son shyly thanked me. Looking forward to my son's future, we left my ex-husband's grave behind.